Hi, Angie. You are on mute, I think.
There we go.
Hello to.
Hi. Is that better?
Yeah, can hear you now. Great. Yeah, welcome.
Terrific.
Yes, and hello to those who are joining us. Thanks for being here. We are just doing some housekeeping and getting ready, so just bear with us as we our panelists come on and we get ourselves sorted. Searching for Alex. I don't think he's with us yet.
And Nick, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Steve. Yes, welcome.
There we go.
Great.
Hey,
Well,
Steve.
Hi, Ange.
we are 3 out of 4, so that's pretty good, but we want 100%.
You have control over stopping everyone else joining early, or is it just going to be that others start to join early? And
Yeah, I think people can just pretty much join from now in, and as soon as Alex jumps in, I'll promote him to panelist, and then we'll just sit until 12 Eastern time, I should say, for those of you who are not from on the East Coast. So I know there's a few.
10 o'clock WA.
Yes, 10 o'clock Perth time. That's right.
I better put my phone on airplane mode.
Now, note we are recording already.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, must have been
Fine. You'll just have to trim the video.
yes. It must have been preset to do that. That's good.
So, Nick, how many do we have registered?
I believe around 300. But yeah, as you know, that can often change on the day. So
yeah.
Sometimes it's up to half or more. Sometimes it's around a third of that can attend. So yeah, it's quite good.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah. I'm just going to follow Alex up, won't be a sec. Hi, Alex.
Hey Nick, how you going?
Very well, thank you. Welcome.
Excellent, thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, loud
Hey,
and clear.
Alex.
Yeah.
Excellent. Oh, g'day Steve.
Hi, Alex.
Hey, how are you?
Well, thanks.
Okay. We all psyched?
Absolutely.
You gonna pray for us, Nick?
I have been.
Ah, good. I always need prayer, so the more
Yeah.
the more better.
Don't we all? Don't we all?
Absolutely.
Make sure my phone is turned up. And for those of you who are just joining the webinar now, we're going to get going in about 5 minutes' time. We've got about, what have we got, 26 people, including the panelists, so that's fantastic. Lots more streaming in, I'm sure. So welcome.
Great result.
Yeah, yeah. For those of you who are joining us, there is a, just for some housekeeping, there's a chat function down the bottom of your screen. It literally says chat. That's where you can, as we go, you can make any comments. And there will be time at the end for a Q&A. There's also a box down there that says Q&A. So during the webinar, it's best to use the chat box. We can just make comments. Like right now, I'd just ask, I better get my video on. I'd ask, just have a go at using the chat box at the bottom of your screen and let us know where you're from. That'd probably be a good place to start.
WA, is there any other state? Gotta love it.
Yeah, it's not very parochial, is it?
Gosh, from all over the country. Awesome.
Yeah, we've got every state covered, haven't we?
Anyone from Tassie? Rockhampton. Beautiful and warm in Rockhampton, I'm sure.
Yeah. Melbourne, Natasha.
Anyone from the Central Coast, God's country.
Southwest of Australia is God's country.
Oh, Lakes Entrance, lovely. Oh, we have someone from Mozambique. Fantastic. Welcome.
Wow.
Territory, yeah, we do have one. Good to see.
Joyce from Melbourne. Shay from Parkes. Jan from Perth. John from Ballarat, Northern Territory. Maria. And Ruth from Melbourne. Okay, we have around 51 people on at the moment. We're approaching midday, so welcome to those who have joined us in the last few minutes. We'll probably start in about 3 minutes' time. There's always a few little issues when you get into a webinar that starts on the hour. You need a coffee, or something's playing up, or for some reason you can't just get there on time, or the Zoom app keeps spinning or something like that. So we always allow a couple of minutes grace, and then we'll make that up as we go.
Cool.
If you're having any, sometimes you can have problems with your internet connection. Or it might be there is down the bottom left of your screen in the Zoom app, there's one button in the very left says mute. So that's your sound. So you want to make sure there's not a line through that microphone, because that'll, and the other one is you want to be able to hear us and have audio and video if possible. We've got this set up for audio and video. So just check some of the connections at your end. We are recording this session. Okay, and again, welcome to those who is another 15 or 16 or 20, and the numbers moving up. And to join us in the last few minutes, we're just about to start, and we know that a few will come in, a few more to come in just on the hour. So welcome. We've just been using the chat function down the bottom of your page just to let us know where you're from. We'd love to hear from where you've joined us from today. Hi to Glenda and Kerry, Claudia, Boomba. There's quite a few people from WA, Steve. They must have known that you were coming on to represent the West. Blue Mountains, Tassie. Oh, yeah. Hi, Karen from Perth. Oh, down in Mandurah. Lovely. Greetings, Rick. Hi, Karen from Queensland.
Hope you got offices everywhere, Nick.
Yeah,
Covering
right.
the country here, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great representation, isn't it? Hi, Linda and Ruth from Perth. Steve, have you got any tips in terms of anyone who's having any troubles with some sound or video that you might be able to offer? In the browser?
Yeah, you might just have to do a check on your where it's got your bottom left where it says mute. There's a little arrow. You can click there, and little up arrow, and it's got a little menu that one of them will say test speaker and microphone. So that should be to test the the speaker and microphone. I'm not sure about the video. We're not using, participants are not using the microphone. They just need to be able to hear us.
Yeah. If they can hear us, that's great. If they can see us, sometimes that can be a bandwidth issue, can't it? For their
Yeah.
And the streaming of the video is a bit much. Depends where you are, I suppose.
So the bottom right, where it's bottom left-hand side, it's got the stopped video, but there's a video settings connection there. You can do that from your computer. If this is the first time you're using Zoom, then you normally will probably encounter some of these issues with getting your audio and video set up. But once you've found the little buttons to click, it's all good.
Yeah, that's right. Great. Well, thank you, Steve. Well, we gave it a few minutes after the hour, and thanks to those who just joined us again. I'd see that we've just been putting into the chat function, which is good to get used to it down the bottom, just to note where you're from. All the systems seem to be working fine. Just a quick recap, there's a chat function down the bottom, which you can just make some comments as we're going. We'll give the opportunity to do that. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A as well. There's an important three-part offer that we want to make to you today, and we'll come to that. And there's a Q&A session at the end where you can ask very specific questions, and the chat function is for during the webinar. So we're well into the 90s in terms of attendees, and I think a couple more are going to stream in, but it's good to be on time and punctual. So I think we might kick things off. So I'll just introduce myself, Nicholas Marks. I'm the CEO of AIFC, and you'll hear a little bit more about who AIFC is as we go. However, I know that many of you do know who we are, so I just want to say a big hello to those of you who are our current students, or are an AIFC alumni, or have just had something to do with us in terms of the AIFC community over the last couple of years. So welcome and welcome back. And to those of you who haven't, this might be your first dealings with us, and you've seen this webinar pop up and you just wanted to come in and have a look. Really glad you're here. Welcome. We're thrilled you're joining us. And for all of us who are here today, I guess we're tackling some big topics: faith, family, and finances. Now, we could drill into each one of these for hours, potentially days, but we won't do that. But we're going to have a go. We may do some more of these webinars that cover these three topics in faith, family, finances. I don't think we're going to reach a conclusion on every one of them today in an hour and a half. But I think we're going to do a deep dive in some areas. And really what we want to do is explore them and explore them with you. We want to encourage you in going into these topics and going into these areas of your life, and we want to equip you as well, so that you leave here having learnt something new, having been encouraged and explored these areas, but also been equipped with some tools that you can use for yourself or recommend to others. And we'll come to those as we get to the offer at the end. So we want to explore, we want to encourage you, and we want to equip you in this webinar. We want it to add value. And really, we want it to be a blessing to you so you can pass that on to others. Now, in terms of faith, we are coming at this from a Christian faith. So I want to put that out there, just in case you weren't sure about that. You may not have been. So that's the lens that we're looking at this through, is through the Christian faith in terms of in Christ. And so if you weren't sure about that, wanted to be really transparent with you. We respect some people may not share that faith with us. So if that's not the case, totally respect that, and that's fine. But I just want to be 100% clear with you, that's the lens that we're exploring this through in terms of faith, really, and family and finances. So there is a biblical narrative, there's a Christ-centeredness to that. We respect that that may not be the case for all of you, but certainly ask that you respect us as we explore this. But again, either way, I think you'll get really good takeaways from this. To tackle big topics like this, we felt it's important not just to have one talking head. We wanted to have four, but specifically 3 people who I think are really eminently qualified to speak into these areas. We don't have all the answers, but we again think we can really add value to you in this. So we have Pastor Steve Poisat, Angie Hazelhurst, and Alex Cook. And what I might do is just throw to each of you now just to do a really a brief introduction of yourself, so that when we do get to the topics, we can know. So we have at some point, each will comment on potentially other areas, but specifically Pastor C is going to talk into faith, and Angie's going to speak into finance, into family. I was checking you there, Angie, checking you with us.
Yeah.
You can speak into finances if you like. So Angie's going to speak into faith predominantly, with a dash of finances, and Alex Cook is from Wealth with Purpose, is going to be our resident financial expert, who's going to be speaking into all things finances today. I'm going to do my darndest to ask some good questions and moderate. And as we said at the start, we just really want this to add some value to you. So, Pastor Steve, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I came from South Africa over to Perth in 2003. I got involved in ministry fairly early, straight after I was 21 when I got employed as a full-time youth pastor at my church in Port Elizabeth in South Africa. And I played kind of every role that you could play, except for the senior pastor role, until my wife and I and my oldest son at that point, we moved to Perth to be involved in a church plant. That wasn't really difficult for me because I was originally born in Sydney. And so I was a little baby when we went back to South Africa. So I came over with the family and have been involved in planting 2 churches, still currently pastoring the one church that we planted, but I'm also involved in education, training, counseling, working on staff with AIFC, involved in lecturing in other places. And it's, for me, just I've had experience in seeing how the Christian faith applies to the everyday, everyday situations, especially with the counseling and the pastoral care. And I'm just passionate about the story of God from Genesis to Revelation, and seeing how that works out in our lives as we follow and seek after the kingdom.
Yeah, great. Well said. Just going to pop a slide up on the screen now as we do this so we can share. And let's go to... Let me try that again. Angie, while I'm fiddling around with slides, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, thanks very much, Nick. So I've been married for nearly 21 years and I have 3 teenagers. So I've got 17-year-old twins and a 15-year-old son as well. So I am in the trenches with all the other parents that might be online. We've just adopted a little puppy called Steve, who is bringing incredible joy into our family, which is lovely. I've had a career in public and private sector in Australia and overseas, and in raising my kids, became interested in theology, got involved in my church, had the privilege of staying home with my kids, and then went back to full-time study of theology and counselling with a view to retrain and searching for a new career that would go some way to in sort of investigating my question of, why are we here and what does it take to be human and live a life of flourishing that indeed God wants us to live. So I'm incredibly lucky to be working in private practice and partnering with churches around Canberra in providing Christian counselling support to members of their congregations, as well as counselling secular clients in my private practice. But I'm absolutely living the struggle of trying to find joy and harmony in a family life. I'm trying to find balance like many other parents. I'm living with the challenges of raising our kids in this digital world. And I'm living the journey of ongoing learning and adapting and changing as my kids are learning and adapting and changing, and I'm trying to do that with them. So it's an evolving process. It's an evolving process, and so I'm really pleased to be able to be here and look through the lens of theology and psychology and how we can build families that are flourishing.
Yeah, thank you, Angie. Alex.
Hi everyone, great to be here with you. So quick background, I'm married, 4 kids, 10 and under, so well and truly in the trenches. Know all about that, know all about sleepless nights, so lots of fun. But my background is predominantly finance. I started originally in stockbroking, but most of my adult life has been as a self-employed financial planner. But a number of years ago, God really put on my heart to start using those skills to help the church in particular. So I set up a ministry called Wealth with Purpose, which has been running about 6 years now. And that ministry is predominantly focused around helping people understand what the Bible says about money and how to apply it to people's finances. And in a really practical way. And one of my real passions is really helping people to live with financial health. And we're going to be talking about what that looks like as we go. But many people, in my view, struggle with their finances and struggle with money. And so our desire is helping people to be financially healthy, because that flows through to all other aspects of their life as well, with your kids and with your marriage and so forth. So, yeah, that's our desire, helping people to flourish, using their money well, but also to use it in a way that's purposeful and to advance God's kingdom. That's our big passion as well. You know, money gets used in a purposeful way, not just purely for ourselves.
Yeah, well said. Okay, we're going to hear from each of you as we go. Pastor Steve, we're talking about faith and trust. What's a basic definition that we could go with just to kick things off? Because it's important we define, though we want to expand on that a lot more.
Yeah. So if we're talking the Christian faith would be defined by the object of our faith, and not in some internal subjective feeling that we may have or beliefs that we may hold to, but we put our faith in Jesus. And so the Christian faith is defined by the triune God, the God who created all things, the God who's intervened through history in his acts of redemption and culminating in Christ. So the Christian faith is defined by trusting in God, specifically trusting in Christ and the work of Jesus that he's done for us. That faith then becomes a living faith that is kind of like a compass. We talk about navigating our culture and navigating the challenges that confront us. So at the very heart of our faith is a living thing that we engage in. You could maybe say faith in that sense is a bit like an operating system of a computer. You know, you may have the latest, greatest MacBook Pro, and it's got all these amazing programs. You can edit things and be creative, but without a basic operating system, its potential is wasted. There's no engaging, and so this is where our faith comes in. It's through faith that we relate to God. It's through faith in Christ that we have restored community with others. It's through our faith that we have a restored call and vocation and purpose in life. And it's through faith that God works in our hearts and renews us. And we take care of ourselves as we love God, love others, and as ourselves. So faith is absolutely essential, both in understanding it as an external objective reality that's happened in the history of humanity through the Christ event, the coming of Jesus, the death of Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus, the ascension of Jesus, the sending of the Spirit. Those are the objective anchors in which we can put our faith on, and then our faith is living in that it's a compass that we navigate everything that we do with.
So with faith being that important, how would you, this is quite a broad question, Steve, how would you think we're going in Australia in 2019?
It's a good question. I think every generation has its unique challenges in which the Spirit of God calls the church to rise up in faith, to challenge. I think how we're going in Australia is, I want to say essentially, I think I want to be optimistic and say that, God loves Australia. God loves the people of Australia, and I believe we are seeing his kingdom come and his will being done in Australia as it is in heaven. And it's through the lives of everyday Australians that are walking in a simple trust in Jesus, trusting Jesus to lead them in paths of righteousness each and every day. So I think that's happening. I think, Jesus gave the parable of the yeast that is in the big lump of dough. And he said that the kingdom is like the yeast. And I think that God's children, the kingdom citizens, we are making a difference. We might not be on the front end of, we're living in a very kind of secularized, polarized world at the moment, across the world, in the West in particular. And we might not be, the flavor of the month in terms of our Christian beliefs, but I think the saying of Jesus that we are the salt, we are the light of the world, we are the salt of the earth is happening. It's happening, and it's just kind of quietly and humbly happening in the background, and the kingdom is influencing society. Australia is being slowly transformed by God's kingdom people.
Mm. Do some of the challenges that we're facing, Steve, that you mentioned sort of polarizing and I think there's other things that in the church that haven't been done well, and that Christians certainly could have done better, that hasn't helped in a lot of ways. What are you seeing in regards to that? As a pastor, as a
okay, yeah,
you've got a unique.
Yeah, well, certainly in my pastoral care work and counselling of individuals, that we talk about the bread and butter of counselling, the bread and butter issues, and there's stress, there's anxiety, there's depression, there's loneliness, there's grief, there's loss, there's all sorts of mental health issues. There's financial issues, there's relationship issues, family issues, blended family issues, parenting issues, identity and purpose issues are right up there, having a sense about it. And I kind of deal with all of these things in an average week, mostly in a one-on-one kind of situation, either in a counseling context or pastoral care, discipleship kind of context. And these are the things that we're talking about, these things. What I think is encouraging is to see that slowly that the church is growing in its understanding of the whole mental health area.
Yeah.
And that there's, certainly, AIFC and others are playing a part in that, in seeing the church in a sense awakened and having maybe a more holistic view, so that our faith isn't secluded to just like the Sunday thing or just religious beliefs, but our faith in fact does actually affect all of life. And so, in the first slide we had that compass there, and we talk about navigating our culture.
Yes.
I think the kingdom is our compass, that we navigate culture, and we need to, through that kingdom compass, the true north is our covenant relationship with God. If you could go across, say, to the east wing of the compass, I think that's having meaningful and having relationships with others, meaningful community with others. If you went down to the south, I would refer that to the whole area of creation and vocation, and where we live and work and do life. So there's a sense where the kingdom allows us to engage with God's creation and the creation mandate to be fruitful, multiply, and work the ground, etc. And to the left, then you would have the self, the taking care of the self. And so, if you look at that, relationship with God, relationship with others, relationship with creation and our work and vocation, and then our care of ourselves, gives us a holistic approach to life. That all of life is lived under the lordship of Jesus, and that every square inch of society actually belongs to Him. This world belongs to God. I'm encouraged in that big view of the kingdom, that big understanding of God and His kingship is becoming more and more prevalent. And so when you look at those big things and then you come down to the daily grind of life, we don't just look at, we're struggling with mental health, so we compartmentalize that and go, well, let's, what we need to do is just see the psychologist only, or we need to see the psychiatrist only, or and like kind of go, well, our faith doesn't play a role in that. God's word doesn't play a role in that. And that's not to suggest that we don't go see the psychologist and the psychiatrist and those kinds of things, but it's our faith that motivates us in dealing with the everyday. Our faith is not separated from the everyday. So I'm encouraged in that, and I think the change is happening pretty rapidly. It's almost difficult to keep up with the pace of change. We've got all sorts of new challenges. You've got everybody's got a computer in their pocket that's like 1 million times stronger than the computer that took Apollo 11 to the moon. It's like we all have these screens, and there's all sorts of new addictions that are being invented every day. So the challenge is ever before us, but our faith is up for it.
And I think what you said earlier too, Steve, we can be optimistic in that, can't we? Because if we what we focus on, you know, like when we're driving the car on the road, if we stare at it, we drift towards it. What we focus on has a, notwithstanding we're being pie in the sky, there are real issues and challenges and frenetic change, as you just alluded to. But what we get in the habit and practice of focusing on really makes a difference, doesn't it? What we choose to magnify.
Yeah, and there's studies that have been coming out that talk about, especially with social media and what you know, your social media feed and that which you are looking at all the time, whether it's your news feed or whatever. And we've got like stuff that's happening all around the world that's been concentrated right before you in your screen. And most of it is negative, you know. And so, as you say, the focus tends to be on all the stuff that's going wrong, which is partly the reason behind this massive polarization in culture. We've just never had the world at our fingertips like we currently have it.
Yeah.
And it's actually affecting our mental health.
Yes. And left unchecked, we'll continue to do so, isn't it?
Yeah.
How we govern ourselves. And feel free, everybody, to make any comments in the chat box as we're going throughout the webinar. We really value it and appreciate it. And so thank you, Steve. And I really like that integrated model of the compass of relationship with God, with yourself, with others, and with creation and
Creation.
vocation. Yeah. And I know we're up to around nearly 120 participants on board. So again, if we didn't catch you in the welcome, we're really, really glad you're here, whether you're a student, alumni, or for the first time joining us. We've just had Pastor Steve talking to us around the faith thing, which we'll come back to, but I want to, have a segue into that and say, okay, well, that's navigating it as individuals. Angie, what about families? Some of the things you've just heard. Let's talk about families for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Let's just, some of the things that Steve just said. What's coming to mind for you about families? I've got a whole bunch of questions I can throw at you. But,
families. I think the family that we're born into, our families of origin, are really important because that's the space where we learn to talk, feel and trust. And we take those lessons and learnt behaviour into our adult relationships, as do the other people that we're interacting with. So it's this sort of melding and joining of story and how we communicate with people. And so that's the micro lens, I guess, with families, that, that's the starting point of where we learn to interact and engage in healthy ways. And I would note that if we've been in a family of origin, our original family that we're born into, that perhaps hasn't modelled healthy ways to interact with people, that we can learn we can learn healthy ways to interact. We can learn how to talk, feel and trust in healthy ways as adults if we're supported appropriately in that. So if you haven't had that childhood experience, don't feel that the game is over. It's not. There's the neuroplasticity of our brain tells us that we can adapt and learn and change. But I take the point that Steve makes too, that the macro picture, the bigger picture, is our faith family, I guess. And where we have this inherent need to be seen and to be understood and to feel a sense of belonging. That's how God created us. And our families are a place where we can experience that initially, as perhaps is our church family or our faith family. So family can be defined in different ways, but in looking holistically, as Steve was talking about, that compass having the various sections, so too with families and how we define families in a modern context where there's increasing breakdown of the nuclear family. Mum, dad, kids is no longer the main model of family. So, we need to be, I think, realistic about what family might look like for some people. But I think the take-home message is that we have this inherent, almost like a sort of homing device, like we have this inherent need to belong somewhere. That's how we're created. And families, in whatever context you find yourself, might provide that platform where you feel that sense of of belonging. And certainly, as I mentioned, the faith family provides that as well.
So faith in itself can be an anchor for a family, can't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And finding, like I mentioned, finding ways where we can be seen and see others, where we can understand and be understood ourselves. And certainly if there's a common thread, faith being one of those potential threads, then yeah, that can create that sense of connection and belonging.
Yeah. So you mentioned there's increasing breakdown of the family, and we know that to be the case.
Yeah.
How important is a flourishing family for, I think if I can go, you mentioned macro. Let's go macro. How important are flourishing families for a flourishing culture, so for a future in Australia?
I think it's critical, and I'd actually do it the other way. I'd actually start off smaller and go bigger. So if, I mentioned families are the area where it's a space where we learn to talk, feel and trust. And we take those skills into our other relationships, into our workplaces, into our churches, into our communities, into our suburbs. And you can see it sort of spreading outwards. So if we're taking healthy ways to talk, feel and trust out into the world, then you can see it will have a healthy impact. Likewise, if we've learnt perhaps unhealthy ways to communicate or build a relationship, then we equally take those unhealthy ways out into our workplaces and schools and places of study and communities and villages. And so you can see the ripple effect. So that's why I would say if we can learn initially some really good skills around interacting with people that enable a build of confidence and a build of self-esteem and create respectful relationships, then we can take those respectful ways of interacting with people out into our broader lives, and you can see it just grows from there. But I think it has to start somewhere, and that's where I think families, however you might define it, is a really good, important starting place. Yeah,
well said. What are some of the good things that are happening in families, just quickly? Because it's not all doom and gloom, is it? There's good things happening.
It's not all doom and gloom. It isn't. And it's easy, as Steve mentioned, where we've got more information than we've ever had before, which can be both overwhelming and frightening. But it can also be really useful if we can be discerning around how we use that information. But more and more people are seeking support, and in families and in the work that I do, I see more and more parents saying, you know what, actually this is really hard. This whole parenting business is really hard, and I just need someone to walk with me for a season to help me recalibrate and restore. So I think that's happening more and more. And we know from research that the Australian Bureau of Statistics has done that treatment rates for people that are suffering, Steve mentioned a rise in mental health conditions, treatment rates have been increasing as well. Nearly 50% of people with psychological distress are seeking treatment now. So that's a really good news story. And I think people are speaking up now. We're seeing media campaigns that say it's not weak to speak. It's okay to put your hand up. Actually, it takes real courage and real strength to be able to say, you know what, this is a tough season right now and I need a little bit of help. So I think slowly, there's a shift. There's a shift in that. There's still some stigma around getting some support, but I think increasingly as people do that and realise that actually it takes real courage to do that. It's a real strength to say, I'd like someone to walk with me for a season. I think that's really important. That's really important. So I think, that gives us some hope.
Absolutely. I mean, I see some things like sometimes they're sitting against each other. There's an increasing prevalence of fatherlessness in our society, which is having, I think, ravaging effects. But at the same time, you see men with their children wanting to and practically getting more engaged in raising children, not just I just go off and work and, the missus takes care of it all. Saying much more engaged fathers. But at the same time, there is an increasing prevalence of fatherlessness. So there's some conflicting or different types of dynamics going on that the data is showing us and that's out there happening in communities.
There is. And again, I would come back to, what's your definition of family? So, we've heard the old saying that it takes a village to raise a child, so I would say, well, who's in your village? Who are the people that are in your village? If you are in a family that is broken down and maybe dad's not there, what are some other male figures in your kids' lives, some trusted male figures that while not taking on a father role, are nonetheless present and can speak into kids' lives. So I think just being aware of who is in your village, who is it that's helping speak into your current family dynamic.
Yeah, I think that's a really good practical tip there, Angie, in terms of might be families where, for whatever reason, it could be mum or dad aren't there, but in your case, as the example, dad might not be there, is having a really good male role model who you can seek out to try to go and find them if you can, to speak into children's lives. I think that's great.
Yeah, and it can come in different shapes and sizes as well. Like there's sort of Big Brother programs, and there's mentoring programs. There's some support at schools that do kind of buddy systems with bigger kids buddying little kids. So there's all sorts of different models that are available. We just need to be open to that, I think.
Yeah. Yep. And I think in that too, we might come back on this one, but if it can be too, is how you were raised yourself. And there might be people on the webinar or listening to this down the track who think, I really didn't get any of that. I grew up and I really wasn't shown much at all in terms of relationships or money, and we're going to come to money in a minute. And I certainly know that was the case in my own story. And so you get to young adulthood or adulthood and light dawns on you, and you sort of think, well, I don't really know that much about these areas, and then you sort of try and figure it out either for yourself or from your peers, and often learning those things from your peers doesn't necessarily go that well. So having older people speak into those areas is, I think, really important. Because sometimes you might be going to learn these new things as an adult, not just when you're younger.
Absolutely.
They might not have been shown to people listening to this when they were younger. And you sort of can have a little bit of shame thinking, well, I don't really know any of this stuff. Like, no one ever told me or showed me. And so it's almost like you've got to go backwards to go forwards, don't you? Isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Which is why it's important to just recognise, well, what was the environment I was raised in?
Yeah.
And where do I need some support with? And we know we can learn. We can learn and adapt. So, there's hope. Hope again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Angie. We'll come back to you. And I mentioned one thing there before about, if you're navigating in your faith and you're part of a family, which all of us are one way or another, one of the areas that I just think when we were thinking about this webinar in terms of faith, family, and apart from the fact they all started with F, which we thought was really cool, was finances. Going, you know what, they're so critical and pivotal in our relationships. And if you've been breathing long enough, particularly if you're an adult, you've probably had enough time to make a mess with money. Can I just get a show of hands or a yes on that in the chat box? Because I think I'll just put my hand up.
Yeah. Yes.
Hands up if you've made a mess with money at some stage in your journey. And yeah, so look, we're all human, and what we want to do is learn from that as we can. But finance is not one of those things you can just sort of intuitively figure it out. I think you do need to get some help from people. And so, and thanks for your patience as I navigate the slides here too. So I'm catching up. By the end of the webinar, they're going to be just right. So we're on to finances, and I want to invite Alex Hook in here, because sometimes, Alex, we've been thinking, I'm pretty good with the faith thing, and I'm happy to talk about family, but when it comes to money, like, that's just a bit of a no-go zone. Or we just get this kind of dread feeling, like, oh yeah, like I remember at one point I was making such a mess with our money that there'd be mail back in the day, everything came in the post, but the mail from the bank or whatever it might be, and I just had this feeling of dread where I really didn't want to open them. And maybe I'm not on my own there. So the good news is I learned a lot of things and worked through that and did a whole bunch of courses, and it really does work. But money can be one of those things, can't it, Alex, where we just get all sorts of different emotions start stirring.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we often underestimate just how significant money is in our lives. And in fact, when you look at it from a faith perspective, the Bible, the most talked about issue in the entire Bible is, in fact, money, wealth, and possessions. And I think the reason being is God knew that we would struggle with it, we would have challenges with it. And so the Bible talks to it in such a profound way. In fact, there are more than 2,350 verses on money, wealth, and possessions. And I think the question then becomes...
How many was that again?
2,350 verses. Roughly 15% of Jesus' preaching, and I think 11 of the 39 parables. And I think that's because God knew that one of the things that will have a profound impact on your relationship with God is money. You know, we often say things like cliches in the Christian world, like, you know, God is first in my life, but is he first with our money? And for many people, as you say, Nick, many people struggle with it. They don't want to talk about it. It's often a taboo issue. Often in churches, you get really mixed variations. Some churches don't want to talk about it at all. A few talk about it a lot, but the vast majority don't talk about it at all. And so many of us are sort of in the dark, in the sense we're relying on what we've been taught from our family members, what we hear on the news, which and many of that can be very unhelpful. And so we need to find ways to actually build knowledge in this area. And in that sense, there is good news. More and more people are realising that they need to get this part of their life right. And the evidence I put for that is many of you on the call will have heard of, the Barefoot Investor, Scott Pape. I think he sold like a million copies of his book, The Barefoot Investor. And I think the reason for that is many people are realising that this is an area of life that they have to take responsibility for. And in Australia, it's a really big issue, because Australia today is the second most indebted households on planet Earth.
Wow.
In fact, to give you an idea of think about how this much impacts people's families, because the number one cause of divorce in Australia is actually financial conflict.
Yes.
But to give you an idea from a budget perspective, about 9% of people's incomes now goes to just paying interest to the bank. Most of that's mortgage debt. Some of it's credit card as well, but the vast majority, so 9.5%, or about 9 to 9.5% of people's incomes just goes to the bank in the form of interest, which is huge. And that's with interest rates at record lows, 3.5%.
And dropping.
And dropping, yeah. In fact, when I joke with pastors, when I teach pastors, I say to them, look, the average Aussie tithe to the bank. That's where their money's going.
Yeah, I don't like that statement, but it's true.
It's true, yeah. And of course, as a result of that, other parts of people's finances struggle. Many people have once again, bring it back to the family issue, is that it causes enormous stress in people's lives when they have too much debt. And it has a profound flow-on effect to their relationship with each other, with their spouse, even with their kids, because you're stressed all the time. But very importantly, to your relationship with God. And that
does, doesn't it? It does, yeah.
So it's huge. In fact, if you look in the parable of the sower in the book of Mark, it talks about the seed being scattered, and one of the seeds gets scattered amongst the thorns. And what it says is that there are three key things that happen: the worries of this life, which, if we're honest, for many of us, it's money worries; the deceitfulness of wealth. Money is very seductive. It's kind of like all these things that we could have, and the desire for other things. Those three big things. And that's why we often underestimate that money is extremely spiritual. We think of it as a practical thing, but it's actually a very spiritual thing. And it has a huge flow-on effect to our faith and to our family life. Huge.
I think that last comment is really telling, because you'll often hear this statement, look, it's just money, or it's just paper. Money's neutral. It's not good or bad. And there's some truth in that. but I think it can belie the fact that what you just said is quite profound, is that it is a spiritual thing. It's not just, well, it used to be paper and coins. Now it's zeros and ones in banking system somewhere. But it actually is a spiritual thing, isn't it? Because it can get our heart.
Yeah, look, the comments that that both Steve and Angie made were really relevant. One, Steve mentioned the word identity, and a lot of what he talks about with people in counselling sessions is identity. And Angie mentioned the need to belong. And both those things are really identity issues. And unfortunately, when it comes to money, often our identity is caught up in money. So in other words, it's caught up in what we have or even what we do. When in fact, we should take enormous comfort in the fact that we are precious children of God. You know, our value has nothing to do with how much money we have or the kind of job we have. Our value is in the fact that God made us and he loves us and we are precious to him. And therefore, this is where money can cause a lot of distortion in people's lives, because it can take them away from who they really are and their true identity, and it creates a false identity. And that's why, once again, money is so important to our spiritual formation and our faith. It's huge.
So it's a really important part. And I think what each of the panelists have touched on is really around the area of discipleship, isn't it? It's around some spiritual formation, as you just said, is being discipled in these areas, preferably at a young age, but not always, if it sometimes doesn't work that way.
I was going to give you an example. I mean, when I was a 21-year-old stockbroker, not only did I want to be successful, but I wanted to look successful. Yeah. And so my identity was in what I was doing. And as a result, what do you do when you want to look successful? Well, you buy things that you don't really need. You know, you borrow money for a car, the car that makes you look good, all this sort of stuff. Yeah. And that has a huge flow-on effect. So one of the things I'd want to leave with with your viewers today is this idea that how you behave with money will have a long-term impact on your financial success and your financial well-being. So we need to make sure that how we think about money is correct, so that we behave correctly with money, so that you have financial health, because that behaviour will have a huge impact.
Yeah, and building healthy practices. So at a really practical level, Alex, what's two things that those listening and watching this webinar can put into place? They might be just, getting going and with money, or it may be, like me, a little way down the track. Might have made some mistakes, might have made a bit of a mess. Might be tracking okay and looking to sharpen the sword a bit more when it comes to money. What are some practical things? Just two.
Two? Okay. So, look, I think the first thing is getting control over how we spend money and how we behave with it. Yep. So the obvious thing you hear from, financial planners and so forth is things like doing a budget. That's helpful in the sense that it gives you a sense of how you spend money. So it gives you sort of an analysis of how you're thinking about planning on doing with it. Fails to do what sort of the next part to it is we need to put in place parameters to help us behave money correctly. So once again, if you look at what, say, Scott Paper for investors, he talks about having buckets. These different buckets are for different things. So you might have an emergency fund, because it happens in families. If say a breadwinner loses their job, all of a sudden that family can be plunged into crisis because they've got no money set aside for an emergency. So you have your emergency bucket, you have your long-term savings bucket, and you have your day-to-day spending bucket and your bucket for your bills, your major bills, your rent and mortgage and so forth. So all of these are designed to help you behave well. So the budget helps you think about it, and then the buckets help you behave well with it. So to me, those two things will help people get control of their finances and manage it more effectively. And of course,
That's good.
Yeah, so that's useful things to get people started.
And the other thing I'd add to that too, is, and this is more from personal experience, is it's never too late to start doing this and get it right, is it?
Absolutely. The sooner the better, particularly when we talk about saving and the benefit of compound interest.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Alex.
Can you guys hear me all right, by the way? Because a lot of people are commenting on they can't hear
There was a little bit of brokenness there, but it came through. But you're back in 2020 now, so thank you, Steve.
Okay.
Steve, in terms of some of the things you were touching on, back in terms of faith and what we've talked about now with family and finance, discipleship, spiritual formation, navigating our faith, practicing our faith in the times that we're in. What are some key things you'd like to share with our listeners and viewers on the webinar?
Sure. Yeah, I've personally found very helpful the teachings of Jesus in his well-known Sermon on the Mount. I think, they're as relevant to the 21st century as they were to the first century. And he has a part in Matthew 6 that kind of comes off the back of the money thing, where he's talking about, he says you cannot serve both God and money. And then he goes on to give his well-known little just instructions on trusting in God and serving God's purposes, even in the midst of each day's troubles. And the text is Matthew 6:25-34, where he says, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about life and what you will eat or drink, about your body." Goes on, he says, "Look at the birds, and God provides for them. Are you not much more valuable?" He says, he talks about seeking first the kingdom of God, and then all the way down at the end, he says, each day has enough trouble of its own. Just a quick summary of the text. But for me, there's three things that kind of stand out there, which almost like handles that I return to every day, that are part of helping me navigate the daily troubles. When Jesus says, look at the birds, look at the flowers and see how they grow, he's actually calling the disciples to be present, because they're so busy worrying about everything, about the future and about where they're going to get everything, and so they caught up with either the problems of the past or the worries of the future. And Jesus says, "Hey, look at the birds, look at the flowers," and he draws their attention into the present. And there's a real art and skill in learning how to be still and present in the very presence of God. And we live in a very action-orientated, busy society. That's, we kind of rewarded if we say, "How you doing?" "Oh, I'm really busy." And
really busy.
Badge of honor. And Jesus is inviting the disciples to just contemplate for a while, just to say, "Hey, just slow down. Just look at those birds. Look at how they go about living their life." And, they don't sow or reap in that sense. And, your Heavenly Father provides for them. How much more valuable. He's inviting them to contemplate the wonderful love and protection and provision of God. But it requires getting out of the past and getting out of the future and getting into the present. There's a presence that's required. And so he invites them in, and he says, contemplate the love of God, contemplate the presence of God. And then the next thing I think that's, for me, an important handle is, he says at the last verse, in verse 34, he says that each day has enough trouble of its own. Another translation says, sufficient for the day is its own trouble. And once again, he's talking about, don't worry about tomorrow, come back into the present. But he's also helping us to make peace with the reality, the fact that life has troubles. There's trials, there's tribulations, there's suffering, there's pain. This is part of the daily fabric of life. And Jesus also taught about the future coming new creation, and that there's a time coming, and you look at the end of the Bible and God wipes away every tear. But in the present, he said, you will have trouble. And part of our modern mindset is to avoid suffering and pain at all costs. So it's like, we're so geared to avoid suffering and pain at all costs, and to try and design our lives to be as comfortable, pain-free as possible, that actually ends up creating more problems for us. And so there's some ancient wisdom where Jesus is saying, look, accept the reality that you're going to have trouble in your life. So there's an acceptance of this trouble, and that you're not actually odd or strange or weird. You're not being cursed, because you're experiencing trouble or that kind of a thing. And he says, accept it. And then lastly, he says, basically, look, in the face of this trouble, do what matters anyway. seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Through trust in Jesus each day, going back to the kingdom compass, we can enjoy a covenant relationship with God. That's our true north. We can pursue meaningful community with others. That's the east. We can purposefully cultivate our bit of creation that God has given us to steward in our homes and in our vocations. And we can intentionally take care of ourselves as a temple of the Lord. We are made in his image, and we can make sure that we take care of ourselves. And so for me then, to seek first the kingdom of God is to be guided by that big compass, God and others and creation and stewardship, and taking care of ourselves. And every day we can go about in the midst of the daily troubles. So we can be present, contemplate the presence of God, meditate on God's love through prayer, through scripture, through rest, through finding daily rhythms that allows for rest. We can accept that we're going to have trouble, and that we're not spiritually second grade people because we have troubles. That's part of what everyday life is. Jesus himself, had massive troubles on his hands.
He did have some troubles. He did.
Yes.
Yeah.
And lastly, in the midst of all that, just go ahead and do what matters anyway. Seek first the kingdom of God. And so I think those three things: be present, accept troubles, and do what matters anyway, for me has become like my that's how I roll. That's what I've got to face life, and I've got to do life, and I take it like that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, I think you touched on something there, and I know that our listeners and viewers will have some questions for you and Angie and Alex. And I mentioned during the earlier on about the offer, and I want to touch on this because it speaks right into what Steve just said and what Angie and Alex have alluded to in terms of equipping, formation, discipleship, and adding value to you. So within AFC, our mission is around transform lives, flourishing relationships, change communities through Christian counselling, and equipping people for life. And so we have a unique offer that we wanted to touch on, because what you're hearing today, and we thought about this, is this is something that I guess as a Christian organisation, as a ministry, as a not-for-profit, we want to be very on the front foot in communicating to you what we're about, because if we grow, that's a good thing for the kingdom, it's good for people, it's good for individuals. So we're about equipping people to go out and equip others. So it's that mindset of getting your own oxygen mask on so you can then go out and help others who may be in trouble as well, or just need insights. And so there's different offers here that we want to touch, and we want to promote them for really good reason, to help you or to let you know so you can tell others who they may add value to. This might not be applicable for you right now, or it might be. The first is around our short courses, personal and professional development for life. You've heard today, we're in a really changing time. It's challenging. There's different hard things that are coming at us, but there's also lots of opportunity. Our view is that you have to be equipped as Christians these days to deal with these things, to understand them, and to help others. You can't just go along not knowing about these things or knowing enough to be dangerous. So we've really thought about this and wanted to develop professional and personal development short courses. And if you go to the offer faithfamilyfinances.com.au/offer, I'd really like you to do that now if you can. If you're at home and you're on or wherever you are, on your computer or PC or phone, whatever it might be, really easy to remember. It's the name of this webinar. Faith Family Finances, with an S on the end, finances.com.au/offer. So these offers are on there. The first one is register for the personal and professional development, and just to stay abreast of what it is and what's happening. And there's a lot more we'll be doing in that space, but we'd love you to register for that, to get involved, to understand what it is, and down the track partake. There's things in there like active listening, Christian finances, developing your trust and relationship with God, introduction to Christian counselling, mental health first aid for Christians. These are the types of things that are going to be in there for people like yourselves to be personally and professionally equipped in these areas. Whether it is for you or it's something that you want to start a journey on in terms of knowing a little bit more and being a bit more equipped, So check that one out in terms of the registering for those short courses on the URL down on the bottom of the screen. The second one is My Christian Counsellor. This is a site, it's a platform that we have developed for two reasons. One is it's for Christian counsellors to run their virtual counselling practice. So they can do all sorts of things in there and run their counselling business or practice from in there. And if that's you, please check out mychristiancounsellor.org.au. But it's also for people who might want to see a Christian counsellor. They might know somebody who needs to talk to a Christian counsellor, but didn't know where to find one. We get dozens of calls every week of people asking us, can you direct us to a good Christian counsellor in our area? And you know what, over time we thought about it and thought we need to do something about this. So over the past year and a half, we've been building this platform, and it's for individuals, whether they're Christians or not, churches, Christian schools, people to find a Christian counsellor, connect with them, see their calendar, book an appointment, book a face-to-screen counselling session, make the payment, whatever their payments are for that person, and engage in finding help. So we wanted to provide a really practical tool to the community where people can find really good quality, accredited, qualified Christian counsellors and find them. So if that's you, check it out. If it's not, and you just think, well, I want to make note of that so I can tell someone down the track, whether it's in your church or your school or your friend or family, whoever it might be. As Steve and Angie in particular have alluded to, we all go through these different struggles at times, and it can be quite normal, particularly the culture we're in. But it is good in being able to reach out for help and have some specific understanding, someone to walk with you and listen to you and equip you with the skills to navigate the future. So that's what mychristiancounsellor.org.au is all about. So we'd really check it out and tell your friends about it. So these are really practical tools to help you and help others. And the third one, again, these are all on the page, faithfamilyfinances.com.au/offer. Log in there now, have a look. There's these three offers. The third is if you really want to do a deep dive and really get equipped, perhaps accredited, qualified, and you want to go and practice as a Christian counsellor, or you just want to get the skills to sit alongside others, journey in others, whatever it might be. We'd ask if you wanted to book a course advisory session, have a chat. There's no obligation. Have a chat with one of our course advisors about, well, what does this mean? How long does it take? How much does it cost? What does it look like? What do I do? What's my next step? Click on that, book a course advisory session, and that'll open all that up to you. So we've tried to design this landing page as easy, 1, 2, 3 step, whatever you might want to look at, whether it's the personal and professional development short courses, the My Christian Counsellor counselling platform, or booking a course advisory session to talk to someone about studying or training in Christian counselling. And there's a whole pathway there. You can knock yourself out from diploma to master's. So we want to be, as I said, on the front foot about communicating what these are, because we know that they add value and they really help people. So check those out now, faithfamilyfinances.com.au/offer. And then that brings us to, congratulations, we got through the webinar, and thank you for participating in it. We're so glad you are here and joined in and have watched it and been a part of it. So we wanted to open that up to any questions that you might have of the panel. So bear in mind, check out faithfamilyfinances.com.au/offer. Keep that page open, but jump in now on the Q&A box down the bottom of your Zoom app that you're watching, and please ask the panel any questions that you might want to ask them about faith, family, or finances. We'll just open that up now.
Nick, maybe while folk are doing that, just to mention that a lot of these topics that we've spoken on we can do deeper dives with our new short courses that are going to be launched, towards the end of the year. And a lot of people had asked for the Kingdom Compass, and so I've just sent a Dropbox PDF there
Great, thank
So you
you.
can just download that, just a single slide with the Kingdom Compass.
That is brilliant.
And that particular would do a deep dive into that in a course called Introduction to Gospel-Centered Counseling. So I encourage folk to look out for that in the future if they're wanting to hear more on that. And they would certainly be covering the finance and family aspects as well in our equipped courses that are on the way.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. There'll be a dedicated portal and site where these courses will be kept, and we'll communicate with you in the next 1 to 2 months what that is and where it is. Love to hear from you with some questions. Have we covered everything and there's no questions, or you just want to throw something at the panel? Anything you want to ask, don't hesitate.
There's one from Candy about raising boys in this generation and developing their faith. If I can speak to that for a minute, Nick.
Absolutely, go for it.
I think raising boys is really tricky in this age, because they have their screens right in front of them, and it's very hard to build connection when there's a screen barrier. So one thing that I found helpful is to try to create opportunity where you can be side to side. So boys, I found, don't like so much talking face to face, but if you're side to side, it's far less confrontational. So thinking about ways that you can do that, it might be things like you're in the car, take the long way home and use that as an opportunity to have more of a chat. It might be that you're going for a walk side by side, take the dog for a walk, walk down, get an ice cream, walk back home. Any activity that gives you an opportunity to have a relational interaction. A lot of our interactions with our kids are transactional. They're based on tasks. Have you done your homework? Have you emptied your bag? Have you put your lunch dishes out? Have you brought the washing in? Have you taken the garbage out? All of those sorts of tasks, those transactional tasks, because we're busy, right? Us parents are busy. So, we have this long to-do list. So that's where we tend to focus our time. But if you can focus actually on relational, on things, activities that build rapport, build connection, that are not tied to task at all, just simply for the joy of being in each other's company. The more of those instances where you're building connection like that, it's like making deposits, to use a financial metaphor, making deposits into the emotional bank account. So I would just try to have opportunities where you can interact on a relational basis rather than a transactional basis. See how that goes.
Thank you, Angie. We have some questions that are in the chat function and some in Q&A.
Nick, one of the questions, I see you've answered it. Faith, family, finances offer. You put that in. That's great.
Yes, that was a great question. Very practical one. And so I've just added the offer link, faithfamilyfinances.com.au/offer into the chat function. Some questions here. There's one, finances. What is your thoughts on, I think it's tithing or teaching that financial
prosperity now.
Yeah. Can you grab that one, Alex?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So basically, I guess from what I can understand of Kerry's question, there's a common thing in some churches, which is this idea called the health and wealth gospel or the prosperity gospel. And it's the idea that if we do certain things, God will make us prosper. If we tithe faithfully, God will make us prosper and so forth. And that our sort of financial prosperity, how much we have, is sort of an indicator of how much faith we have. And I think it's a very dangerous teaching, basically. So what I see in the Australian church, particularly just as from my observation from going church to church, is there are three main models. There's what I call the prosperity gospel, which, to be honest, I don't see a lot of, but you do see it, and Kerry's obviously seen that. But then there's the poverty gospel, which I'd see a lot more of. It's this idea that everything is scarce, that we don't have enough, etc. And there's what I call the middle road, and the middle road is what I call stewardship. And to me, the way I define stewardship is managing God's blessings in God's ways for God's glory. In other words, we need to understand that God is our provider. Everything that we have is actually His, and that we are called to use it in His ways. So manage it according to biblical principles. So if we took debt, for example, don't take on too much debt. And because debt can lead to slavery, that's what the Bible tells us. And then, of course, we need to use our money to glorify God. That is, we are to use it in such a way that we focus on things of eternity. In fact, one of our slogans that we use in our ministry is investing in eternity. So we should use money for things that are kingdom orientated, for kingdom purposes, not just our own benefit. Now, there is a sort of a fine line here in the sense that we do need to use money for our families and for enjoying life, but then there's the other side of it, which is we need to live generously and help those in need and advance the gospel. So there's sort of a tension that as a Christian you'll always live with between things for yourself versus the things for others and things for the kingdom. But I certainly think the teaching that this idea that if you just give tithe, you'll become rich, all that sort of stuff is effectively a false teaching, particularly if it's built around this idea that it's a sort of a transactional relationship with God. What people forget is that God is generous because that's actually who He is. That's His character. God is generous because that's His nature. If my financial prosperity was dependent on me being generous to God, then I think most of us would be in trouble. It's actually because God Himself is generous, and we should enjoy what He gives us. So hopefully that sort of answers Kerry's question to some degree.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And there's one there that sort of flows on from Anthony, just on the finance ones with low-income families struggling. And I think we've got a booklet that we're going to send out to the participants of this as well, aren't we, in the next few weeks, so which might help with that, in just directing them where to go. Yeah,
so we've got a free ebook called Simple Steps for Financial Freedom. So that's designed to just keep money simple. And my suggestion to everyone listening is don't overly complicate money. Keep it simple. And there's, a free ebook which we'll provide in the coming weeks. And that is very much about keeping it simple and some basic steps for people to follow.
Yeah, and that's for people, whether you just for yourself individually or something that you may want to share within your church or whatever, because there's other questions around that. And there's one here in the Q&A that's got, I was going to say Steve's name written all over it. It really does. So can you see that one there, Steve, around the statement around challenges regarding our polarised Western world?
Okay, yeah.
In Q&A.
Around polarised Western world in relation to an increase in mental health conditions. Yeah, I think the statement around the polarization that's taking place in the world that's not necessarily directly linked to the mental health conditions. I think they're two different things, although both of them have a similar root. The polarization that's taking place in the world can be partly accredited to the social media and what's happening in that space, so that, as we mentioned earlier, there's so much news that's just constantly being streamed before us on our screens, and we're constantly being shaped by that which we're looking at. And so with the rise of the internet and the rise of social media, the polarization has risen proportionately. So we're more polarized and we're more divided than we've ever been in some ways, even though we have more technology and more access to information. So the heart condition of humanity hasn't been solved purely by the technology. And so there's a technology issue that is not solely to blame, but is partly a contribution towards the polarization. And then the technology with social media is also partly linked to the mental health conditions. Everyone's touched on the whole identity issues, and especially if you're looking at social media and what everybody else is up to and what everybody else has got, there's constantly going to be the sense that we don't have enough, that we're not normal, that that we just don't measure up, and so social media is fueling a lot of mental health issues in and of itself. with teenagers, there's always been the thing about gaming and screens. And so maybe I shouldn't say social media, I should say screens. Everybody's got a screen, whether it's on a computer or a laptop or a phone. And we're so engaged with this virtual world. And that as well seems to not be helping our mental health. So even though we're living in times where we have a lot of physical safety in Australia compared to other places, but we have a very high rate of mental health conditions, and the government certainly put a spotlight on that. So I think the mental health, the rise of mental health conditions, as well as the polarization, have common roots in the almost unprecedented growth of technology, and everybody having a screen.
Yeah. There's one here, and I'll just throw this out to the panel. There's one around someone who's mentioning they're having trouble with relationships and accessing. It looks like access to and relationships with family members. It may be related to a breakdown. Forgive me if I've got that wrong. What is your take on building a relationship with someone who does not want one?
It's tricky, isn't it? Because we can't control other people. We actually can only control ourselves. We can only control how we interact with others. Other people have a choice in how they then respond to that approach. So, but again, I would come back to thinking about ways that are relational rather than transactional. So if you keep in mind this inherent need that we all have to be seen and to be understood and to belong, so what do you think the other person might be wanting to be seen? How do you think they might be wanting to be understood? And how can you meet them in that space? So what kind of grace can you offer to them that says, I'm here for you. Now, it's up to the other person whether they then choose to interact with you, but given we're only responsible for our own thoughts, feelings and actions, we can front up. Brene Brown would say we could, come into the arena, and it's up to the other person whether they join us there. But focusing on relational rather than transactional might, again, I would come back to that. It just might be a slight change of perspective, and it might take a number of times, right? That the invitation might not be taken up the first time, but if you continue to show up, then maybe they'll respond positively to that showing up.
Yeah. And I think someone's mentioned the same thing, is around seeing a good Christian counsellor, and it takes love and grace and patience. So well said, and being consistent and persistent, isn't it, Angie? Around it might mean seeking forgiveness. It depends on the situation, and showing up and being consistent and persistent over time.
I think so. Relationships are complex, and we each come with our own backstory. So it can take time to unravel that a little bit, and again, learn to interact in healthy ways with other people, and for them to respond in healthy ways as well. But I kind of want to, actually, what I'd really love to do is pick up on a point that Steve made around self-care, and how important that is to bring to everything that we do. We have this sense that self-care is a luxury, is a bit of an indulgence, but actually, I would see that as essential. I would see that as oxygen, because if we're looking after ourselves, then we're better able to, as Steve rightly said, stay present in the moment and not be carried away by anxiety that says, what if this happens? But actually taking the time to fill up our own tank. And when our own tank is full, then we can both parent as well as interact with other people from a place of love rather than a place of fear. so we can dial down our responses so that we're able to see other people and understand other people. But it starts with us. Actually, starts with us. We need to take care of ourselves. Yeah, I think that's critical.
Yeah, thank you, Angie. There's one here around. Looks like there's one around courses. So one on the courses. There's short courses. So if you register for those on the Faith Family Finances /offer, there's the short courses, which are a range of prices. So some are like very favourably priced or appropriately priced. It's just a short course to dive into and have a go at. So we're talking, less than $100 or a couple of $100 for a half or 1 day course, through to our Christian counselling courses that go from diploma right through to masters. So they're obviously fully priced, accredited courses with all the associations in Australia. So again, just they range from thousands of dollars down to a lot less for our introductory counselling and equipping courses. But by all means, please put your details in there and we'll follow you up. And we'll follow you up just to have a chat. So we're not following you up to sign you up to anything, but it's just so you can explore why do you want to do these? What are they about? And how do you take the next steps? Simple as that. There's a really good one for Melissa here too. And I don't know if Alex or Steve want to take this one around Old Testament Mosaic covenant on tithing. You can probably answer this pretty quickly. And the New Testament, without going into a deep dive on that one, but could someone jump on that one from Melissa?
Yeah, I can touch on that if you like. So look, just a slight quick disclaimer here. I work with churches across all denominations and they all have slightly different theological positions on the whole issue of tithing. So I'll share with you my one, but I'll say that people should talk to their own pastors about this issue because there are different theological positions on it. So some people equate is the sort of pre-law, which is that Abraham tithes till Melchizedek out of the spoils of war. And some people therefore argue that because Abraham tithed, then it was pre-law, that it should be something that continues forevermore. Others take the view that because tithing existed in the Old Testament and Jesus never specifically denounced it, nor did Paul, that it's something that continues. And I would say a significant number of church leaders follow that model. And then the third model, which is probably more my view, which is that all my money is God's. And when you look at the teachings of Jesus and Paul, for the most part, they are silent on tithing, for the most part. In fact, Jesus mentions it twice in two different Gospels, and it's just in relation to rebuking the Pharisees who did tithe but didn't show love. And really, to me, what Jesus was saying and Paul both is that the overwhelming message of the New Testament is one of living generously, living with an open hand. So everything we have is God's and we should live open-handedly with it. So I don't think that should be driven by a percentage. And to be honest, we could talk for an hour on this, and I know Nick doesn't want me to, but to say my personal view is that it's all God's and I should live generously and open-handedly with it and to sow into the things of the kingdom. And of course, that does start with your local church, because the local church is the main vehicle by which God expands the God's kingdom. So that's how I'd answer that. But it's a big discussion, and I could talk for hours on it.
Great. No, I think that's well succinctly said, Alex. Yeah, generosity lifestyle. Do we have any other questions that anyone wants to jump in and say? So we're coming to that point. Again, if you haven't checked out the faithfamilyfinances.com.au/offer, please do so, because that's where we can really inform you more on these things and follow you up appropriately and clarify next steps. If there's any other questions, by all means, send them through now.
Wen has asked a question about the ballpark figure of how much these courses cost and what sort of time commitment. So maybe just quickly talk into that. As far as the AIFC courses, there's the AIFC courses that are accredited courses that you get diploma, as Nick mentioned earlier. You can go from a diploma and then through a partnership with Sterling, you can go all the way up to a master's degree. Those courses, the prices would be on the AIFC website, and those would be full-time or part-time diplomas and advanced diplomas, etc. That which is going to be launched later in the year is the short courses we call AIFC Equip. And there'll be some free webinars there. There will be some courses that will be affordable just as one-off little short courses that you do take 3 hours to do it. Maybe do a series of short courses and cluster them together. And those will be definitely very affordable, and there'll be different kind of options as to that. But once again, that will be all available on the website if you want to have a look at actual courses.
Yes, that's all on aifc.com.au, which is our primary website. Well, it's, I think we may have, hang on, there might be some more.
There was one question, Nick, from Ricky about good and godly role modelling from other males.
Okay.
I guess one thing that comes to mind there is broadening your definition of, like I asked that question, who is in your village? Who is in your village, where it takes a village to raise a child? So who are the other males around kids that can provide that good role modelling? There may be some in the church. There might be some people in youth group or some of the youth leaders. There might be people at school, some of the male teachers possibly, and you can start to have conversations at home around, if your child has male teachers, talk about some of the characteristics of those people. So there can be that incidental modelling that happens in their everyday interactions as well. Obviously important to be discerning around trusting people that you let speak into your kids' lives. So I think we need to be sensible, not fearful, but sensible about that. But there are other places. Maybe it's sporting teams. Maybe it's a coach. Maybe it's an older child who lives up the street who used to play basketball, and your son plays basketball, and that might be a way to make some connections. So I would just think more broadly about, again, I'd come back to who is it that's in your village that can speak into your kids' lives.
Right.
We have a final one down here from Mary regarding screens. I think you were touching on that, Steve.
Yeah, just looking for the question regarding the screens. Can we look at the skill?
It's just that balanced approach, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, I agree. We need to, if we identify problems, that must be a very small part of what we talk about. We need to be able to go ahead with, providing a solution. And unfortunately, we can't do that on a limited webinar like this. And I think the whole area of screens and engaging with social media and screens, I think would well be a fantastic short course that we could develop with the expertise of others that are involved in this, which would give us a lot more time to unpack the topic.
Yeah. It's just that balanced approach, isn't it? Of and having conversations with our kids. We've just, for the last 10 years with phones where they've been so much more prevalent, particularly smartphones, is that conversations around what they're good for and perhaps what not, and what they use them for, and keeping it out in the open and educating as you go, and learning from your mistakes, and finding all those extra devices in their bedrooms that you didn't know were there in terms of other screens. So it's experimentation and learning, isn't it? Just from Marika, you just said it's on the chat box. You've just put it's faithfamilyfinances.com.au/offer. So you've got .com there. So it's faithfamilyfinances.com.au /offer, but the .au being important there, no worries. There's a couple of questions there around dads and fathers, and this is, certainly an area that we're very passionate in. An organisation that I've had some involvement in for a number of years is called Dads for Kids. So if you're looking for resources and encouragement for men, there's a question there about encouraging, because I think encouraging dads is really important given how vital dads are in children's lives and for families' health. So Dads for Kids is a good one for resources and to check out. There's a number of them out there, but they're a good Christian fathering organisation in Australia.
Yeah.
There's certainly a number of them out there in the US as well, around focus on the family and some other men's leadership ones. But I certainly would, having been involved with Dads for Kids for a number of years, have seen good things coming out of there in terms of encouraging men. And there's even a review going on at the moment in terms of how family court works in Australia too. There's in terms of access to children, because I know one of the questions is in and around that. So there is a lot happening in this space to just bring some balance and increased health, I think, into these areas. But I love the question, just encouraging dads is so important.
Yeah. And I think too, recognising that dads are as important for their daughters as their sons.
Absolutely.
So, often we can think, dads and sons, but actually as girls age, as the girls enter the teenage years, they look to dad or their father figure to sort of, for validation and affirmation and that unconditional love. So dads are really important for girls as much as boys.
Very true.
Absolutely. I think dads are important in terms of raising boys to call them out into manhood, and also in terms of their daughters. Daughters very strongly form their relationships, not completely, but in a very strong way based on the relationship they have with their dad. So yeah, very, very good point. There was another question there around the website, around someone was having trouble getting into it. So I just want to clarify that again, www.faithfamilyfinances, that's all one word, faithfamilyfinances.com.au/offer. Okay, we are smack bang on 1:30. I think we've reached the end of our questions, so thank you. And there's a couple of people saying they can't. Yep, that's right. What Steve sent through there is correct. faithfamilyfinances.com.au. While we're on here, I'm just going to check right now as to whether that works. So bear with us. Yes, it does. faithfamilyfinances.com.au. So that's working fine, and it's /offer. So that's the website again. Thank you to all of you attending. We wish you a very good day. We do appreciate you coming back, to our alumni, students, and new people joining into AIFC. And thank you to those who have jumped onto that website already. We really value your time and your participation. And I'd like to give a special thanks to our panellists, Steve Poisat, Angie Hazelhurst, and Alex Cook. We really appreciate you guys, and thanks for making today a real success. And I think we achieved our goal of exploring, encouraging, and equipping people. We'll send some things out to everybody just to, as we promised we would today. So thank you, everybody.
Well done. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah.
God bless, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.